Welcome back to the channel, everyone. So after last week's little episode on some of the electronics, what I thought we'd do is have a little look at seeing whether we could get this fired. As you saw, it did turn over on the starter, so the starter there is working fine. We're going to have a little look at the ignition and see whether we can get this to go. Now it's got no fuel tank in it, so it's going to just be run off starter fluid through there. What I'm going to do is check a few things. Now I have already had a little look at the distributor here, and if you notice, the condenser is hanging slightly loose there, and that's because when I built it I just threw in the first screw that I had, and I realised with a little bit of electrical testing it was actually giving a constant short because the screw was so long it was touching the back of the points, so it was never going to generate any spark. We've got an original Morelli distributor cap on there. We've also got an original resistance spec, or the correct resistance specification coil over here. So I think is actually the one that was on the car when it was in Italy. New set of leads. I have temporarily got some of these little spark plug testers in there just so I can see that we've got a spark, because obviously it's not going to turn over and fire, so the only way I'm going to know that I've got a spark is actually to have some sort of reading in there. If I do have a spark, what I'm going to do is check all the timing and stuff like that, and check the valve clearances before we chuck any fuel or starter fluid in there to try and get it to turn over. Yes, this is a little bit dirty now, it will all be cleaned up soon enough. I've just put the battery back on charge, and I have another little bit of mobile video editing software, Adobe Rush it's called, which I'm going to try and use to edit this video, so hopefully it won't be a one-hit wonder. But what I'm going to do is plug the battery back in, and I'm going to start it manually. For those that don't know, you can actually reach down here and you can manually crank the starter over just by pushing it, and then we shall film here to see whether we've got any spark to those plugs. Just reconnected the battery, so what I'm doing is coming round the back here, trying to avoid my enormous spider friend that's living on the wall beside me, and I'm going to manually crank the starter. Now the starter has permanent 12 volts from the battery, completely bypasses the ignition. Actually the wiring goes into the starter and then from the starter to the ignition, so therefore that's actually the source of the 12 volts to the rest of the car. So I'm just going to lean over here, try and keep the camera pointed at the plugs. Ignition's on, so we've got power to the coil, and let's just check the starter's going. Okay, so the starter is going. Let's get the starter engaged, the Bendix engaged. Oh. Try and do this one-handed is quite awkward. Okay, so we have spark. You can see that flashing there. Admittedly I couldn't quite see whether they were both going at the right time. So now I'm just going to pop the cover off here, because that way I'm going to be able to check that it is timed correctly and that the valve clearances are set correctly. So we'll just take the rocker cover off. As you can see, I haven't installed it particularly tight for now. A couple of reasons: it's got a crushable gasket, just a paper one, thick paper one. So what I don't want to do is over tighten it and actually bend the metal. It's going to cause clearance issues, and we'll pop the distributor cover off just cap off and we'll check the timing. However, I don't want to burn the coil out, so I'm just going to stop this for a second and go and switch the ignition off. So I've wound this round so the timing pointer on the crank pulley there points at the timing mark on the side there. The distributor, or the rotor, is pointing towards the block, and just checking the rockers, number 1 here is on its compression stroke. Both of them go to top dead center at the same time, but this is on its compression stroke because both of the valves are closed, whereas as you can see from the rockers there, those are not both closed. So we'll time it based off this. Now the static timing on these is 10 degrees before top dead center, so what I'm going to need to do is just rotate the engine over, and I'll do this off cam because I haven't got enough hands. 10 degrees before top dead center is 13 mil around this crank pulley, which puts it roughly in line with that bolt there. So I'll twist it over there, and then what I'll do is I'll check that the points are just starting to open on the distributor, and if not, I'll loosen it and I'll rotate it to advance or retard the timing as needed to get it to a position where hopefully it will be able to start with a little bit of fuel in it. Right, so that's now timed to 10 degrees before top dead center. I've double checked that these plug leads are actually going to the correct spark plugs. They were going to the wrong one, so it was going to be 180 degrees out of phase, and if it did anything it would cough back through there, but it would be trying to fire the incorrect spark plug, so it wouldn't be firing the one on the compression stroke, which is obviously never going to make it start. So what I will do now is I'll just stick back on the rocker cover like so. He says making a very easy job. Look really difficult with one hand there. Again, all it's really doing is keeping the oil in, so I'll just spin that down on there, tighten it all up once it's good to go, and then what we'll do is get the camera on a stand on a tripod, and I'll spray in some start fluid into the top here. Then what we can do is see whether or not it will even slightly cough into life. If it doesn't, it's going to be a little bit of head scratching for me trying to work out what the problem is, because it's got compression, it's got spark, the spark is theoretically at the right timing, so I can't actually think what would go wrong, but we'll see. All the best laid plans and that. So what I'm going to do is just chuck a bit of this easy start down there. I'm going to leave you guys here at the back whilst I jump in at the front, stick the ignition on and see whether or not we can get it to go over. I'm going to put a relatively large amount of this in, probably, well, hopefully not enough that I cause it to flood. That might well be a little bit too much, but we'll see. That really doesn't want to seem to fire, and it seems to have lost its electrical power, so I wonder if there's a little bit of a short somewhere. Let me go and investigate. So I've had a little look in there, and I've got 12 volts to the starter, which is fine, it's permanent 12 volts. When I go and put the push button to crank the starter over, it's not turning at all. So there's something wrong with the switch, or something inside is dirty, or whatever. So I'm going to have to pull that starter out, and I do this way more often than I probably should. I leave these cars for an awful long time. I've just had to work on the starter in the other Fiat that I've got, that I left for ages, and it had a little bit of an issue with parts that vibrated loose. They seldom actually need any replacement parts. They often just need kind of stripping a little bit, tightening up, cleaning, whatever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to whip that out. Now it's right down the back of the engine, right up against the bulkhead firewall, which makes it a bit of a pain in the backside to get out. There is a little bit of a knack to it, but I don't do it quite as often as I used to, and I seem to keep forgetting that knack. Although, in fairness to myself, last weekend I did whip one out, fix it and put it back in probably about 12 minutes. So not all that bad, but a little bit boring to have on camera. It did also sound like, for the speed that the starter was turning over when there was no load on it, it chugged a little bit, considering it's got 12.8 volts running into it. So it does need a little bit of a look at, because I think one of the problems is the engine's just simply not spinning over as fast as it should. There's no reason internally why it shouldn't spin over. Okay, it's not locked up or anything like that. It's just a little bit slow. So we've got a little bit of a starter issue. So I'm going to take that out now. I'm going to clean it up. I'm going to test it on the bench. I'm going to stick it back in, and then we're going to go again. Okay, so those of you that have been on this channel a lot will have seen many of these starters on here, because they seem to be forever in and out, and I've done one on how to rebuild them, so I'm not going to do another one on how to rebuild them now. But suffice to say, it only took me the length of a NoFX track, separation of church and skate, actually, if you are into that sort of thing, which is not a very long song, to get this completely out. Now, if we have a little look at the Bendix down here, which is the bit that I can't really get this on camera very well, the bit that engages with the flywheel, it looks all right. Again, the switch looks all right, so I'm going to have to just, I haven't got anything that's loose either, so there's nothing immediately obvious with this. What I will do is just strip it down, clean it up, test it on a battery before I go and put it back in. And I imagine that I can probably get it in the time it takes to play another NoFX song. However, reconnecting the cable on here, which is nice and easy to get out, it's probably going to take, let's go for an 80s Metallica track to get that back in, for those of you that want to use music as time. So I'll check back in a few minutes. Okay, so I've now stripped this down, I've tested all the contacts. Here I pulled the commutator out and just cleaned it up on the drill. Now, what I did notice as I was doing it was that there was a slight lateral play in the commutator, which meant that actually it was catching ever so slightly on the bushes here. I suspect when it was under load on the engine, the Bendix was out, it was pushing it back and it was catching slightly. So what I did is I just stripped it down and just drove this brass bush in ever so slightly further, so that now what we've got is absolutely no play there. I just chucked it on a 12 volt battery just to make sure that it spun over nice and lively. So now I'm going to put it back in the car and we're going to try again. Okay, well, sadly I've now got that motor working on the bench fine, but it seems to have an intermittent dead short in it, and the power goes straight to ground. Not all the time, but occasionally. So I'm going to have to take it out again. The brushes, one of the brushes was arcing, which I think was the problem the first time. But yeah, it's going straight to ground. So basically it's not going to start at the moment, and the double problem with it is that because all of the electrics for the main body of the car are fed through there, the moment we get a dead short and it goes straight to ground, the entire car dies. So it's pretty vital. It's not just one of those, oh, we'll bump start it, it'll be fine. It's one of those, if I don't take it apart and fix it, it's just not going to go. Well, that's a bit of a pain, but things don't always go quite according to plan in YouTube land. It's not like a Discovery Channel show or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, not today, I'll stick this video on so everyone can see my spectacular failure and potentially learn from it. We're nearly there though. We've got spark, got compression, we do occasionally have power, we've got it timed, and we've at least got the ability to squirt fuel in it. So other than the electrical issues, it should be good to go. So what I will do is I will, at some point, I am, you know, this is my second job, I am working sort of 11-hour days at the moment in my day job, so it might not be any time soon, but hopefully by next week I would have had a chance to strip that starter down again, find the dead short, fix it, or, you know, buy in whatever parts are needed to get it working, and then we should be good to go again. Please continue to give us a follow, like, subscribe, chuck me any comments. Take care, guys.